Okay, let's go ahead and start off with your priority system in terms of diseases and how it's going to help your rotation. The first thing we want to always do and make sure is that our bone shield and our horn of winter are up. That's the reason why you want to go ahead and get something such as power auras or tell me when, so you can display the timer without having to look at your top hand corner. So once those two things are up, what we're going to do here is apply our outbreak, which only has a 1-minute cooldown, so you want to make sure you're using that every time it's up. Whether it's just one mob or two, you definitely want to be using that, since it does save you from having to use an unholy and frost rune, which would result in a loss of a death strike. Once we've applied that disease, we're going to use our pestilence to spread them if it were an AoE situation. Once that's done, I personally like to use hard strike if it's 3 or less enemies, but if it's going to be 3 or more, then you definitely want to be using blood boil instead. So in this case, we're going to use hard strike since it's only 2 enemies. Now you're going to be noticing I'm going to use 2 attacks, and they're going to coincide with each other. That being rune strike and blood tap whenever it's off cooldown. So those are the 2 main things I'm going to be using in this demonstration. So let's go ahead and try it. Okay, let's change the scenario a little bit. Let's pretend your outbreak is on cooldown. If you notice, I only have Icy Touch on my bars. The reason being is because I don't always want to use Icy Touch and Plague Strike, simply because that's going to result in less death strikes. Again, this is priority based and not rotation. So I don't confuse you, I'm going to explain to you why I only have Icy Touch on my bars. I felt that having your enemy attack slower, 20% to be exact, is much more efficient than having to put a 10% damage reduction. Because sometimes the enemy might hit you very slow but very hard, or he might hit you very fast and very little. So to counteract them both, you always want to have Frost Fever on them, because it's guaranteed to slow their attacks. So it gives you much more opportunity to stack your death strike, which will result in less damage. So let's go ahead and see how that scenario will play out for us. Now, whenever you're faced with an AoE situation when you're dealing more than 4 mobs, as I mentioned before, Blood Boil is going to be your best ability against this. And another one would be Death and Decay, also known as D&D. So to open up, I'm going to go ahead and want to use D&D because it's much more effective. It gives me a very big area to work with. However, keep in mind that if a mob is CC'd, you want to be careful where you drop it. You don't want extra damage or unnecessary, because your healers will hate you for that. So always be careful where you use your D&D. So let's go ahead and see how that scenario plays for us.
I've been moving 'cause my heart is true, telling everyone I know about you. Tell your mama that you won't be home. Let your daddy know you're not alone. All I wanna do is make you money. I said I love you.
Now, let's pretend that one of the mobs are CC'd. In this case, Skull has been CC'd, and you don't want to pull him by accident. So what we'll do in this case is use Death Grip to our advantage. Let's go ahead and see how that plays out. Okay, let's take this situation for instance. Right now we have two enemies that are closest to you and one that's pretty far. So how do we go about this without having to use excess diseases? Very simple. The first thing I would want to do is drop the Death and Decay to my closest enemies. Then, if Outbreak is up, I'll go ahead and use it on the primary target, and then I would use my Death Grip on the farthest one, so that this way once I have him in my reach, I simply tap back to my primary, then I shoot Pestilence, so this way I don't have to be spraying the diseases or applying them twice. Let's see how that works out. Now, let's say you're going up against a very diverse enemy, such as a caster and a melee. Now, casters have always affected every tank class, but when you're a Death Knight, you have a huge advantage over others, is the fact that there's so many things you can use to mitigate that spell damage. One of them is your anti-magic shell, which only has a 45-second cooldown, so you can use it pretty much all the time, very freely. The first thing you want to do is you want to get aggro on that caster, simply because he's going to be farthest of you. He might stay stationary and start casting his spells on either your healer or your group, or sometimes even focus on you. That's excess damage, so you definitely want to target him first, gain enough aggro on the caster, and then spread your diseases from there on. So let's go ahead and see how that works out for us. Now, there's going to be many times where you're going to find yourself dealing with multiple casters. Now this could be a very big problem simply because they're very stationary and don't always run to you. So, the best way to avoid this is by simply using two of your abilities. One of them is your Death Grip, which you can bring one caster to you. The other one would be your Strangulate. Ultimately, AMS would be a great cooldown to use as well. However, you don't want to use them until you know that they're going to start opening on you, because sometimes they aim directly for your group, so that's just going to be a waste of cooldown. So you want to make sure that they're going to be casted on you for it to get the full benefit. So let's go ahead and see how a situation would work out using Death Grip and Strangulate to your favor. You might find yourself in a situation where you don't have Strangulate or Death Grip, but you do have your AMS. So, what you would want to do is very simple. Simply run up to the group, throw your diseases on the caster, and have your AMS up. So this way you can go ahead and mitigate the first attack that he does. At the same time, have your Mind Freeze ready. Since with our spec it doesn't cost us any runic power, we can go ahead and use that the second he does his next spell. Let's see how that works out for us. sometimes you might find yourself in a situation such as this. Now this poses a threat not only to yourself, but also to your group, mainly for a couple of reasons. Some of those being, you won't be able to get enough thread on them. Second, you need to make sure your diseases get on all of them without having to reapply them via pestilence. And you want to make sure you have your death indicate for this. If it's not up, just let your group know that you're waiting for its cooldown. So, if we're dealing with a couple of mobs that are spread out, you want to make sure that both your death grip, your strangulate, and your death indicate are ready to go. This makes things so much easier. So what I'm going to do in this demonstration is I'm going to death grip, star, I'm going to strangulate, diamond, drop my death and decay, throw my diseases on the one I just finished strangulating, which would be star, and then spread them via pestilence. Let's go ahead and see how that works for us. Okay, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about single target now. In this case, I figured I'd go ahead and do this on a boss since they have more health, and I can actually show what you can do without him dying too soon. So, for a single target, Outbreak is your best choice, simply because it puts both your diseases up for free. Now, if it is on cooldown, remember, same thing applies for this. Icy Touch always first. Since you don't have to use Pestilence, that's one rune you don't have to worry about. So, once your disease has been applied, we're going to go ahead and use our Death Strike first, since we do want to get a blood shield as fast as possible. However, given the situation, if you don't have your diseases up, then the best thing you want to do is Death Strike. Simply because having a blood shield matters most than having the diseases going. If threat is not an issue, then you definitely want to make sure that survivability comes first. If threat is an issue, you can go ahead and wait for those diseases to get on cooldown. You can apply them first, and then proceed on with your Death Strike. So let's see how it would be in a situation where I do have my diseases ready.
Cause my